there is no appeal process for whether a house is occupied. The only thing that you can appeal is whether a building was there. We filed that, but the problem was that the census in 2020 was so short-staffed. Many times they only went to a house once to see if anybody was there, even though their own rules say they had to go 6 times. Right now, we have no ability to appeal whether somebody was in that house, even though we show them they're paying their electric bill, even though we show them the post office delivering mail there, even though we show them that the U of M and Wayne State folks found people there, they won't accept the appeal. And so we have been asking for an appeal process to be in place. The Census Bureau keeps saying they're working on it, but it's been a year and a half now, and they haven't opened the appeal process. And so I'm hoping Senator Peters can help move them off center.
Otherwise, that appeal is just kind of dead in the water, or are there other
Yeah,
opportunities?
we will win some part of the appeal because they missed a lot of houses, but they missed a lot more people inside houses. And they do not, at the moment, have an appeal process for their failure to find people in a house. That's the biggest issue. And they say they're going to come out with some rules on this, but it's been a year and a half. And
Can you
so,
explain on the countywide resolution program what it means to Detroiters? If there is, they have a finding, they say, hey, your data's right. What
Yeah.
they can expect
it means
to see?
it means $10 million a year in revenue sharing every year for police and fire and parks. It means more federal affordable housing money and block grant. It means more Medicaid money for healthcare. It means more school lunch money for our children. All of those things are affected by these numbers. We're going to win one of these appeals. It's a matter of time. The facts are all on our side. But when we do, it matters a whole lot to the residents of this community.
You mentioned you have a lot of allies in Washington on this to help. How disappointed are you that you're still at this point in the process?
You look at what the federal government has had to deal with in the last year or so. I appreciate all the crises. My point is, it's now time to focus on this census question. It's been a year and a half, and I'm really confident Senator Peters, who chairs the committee, is in the right place to get the Census Bureau director to focus on it's time to put in a fair appeal process.
Do you frame this as a systemic racism?
It is. There's no question about it. Again, look at Director Santos' statement on March 10th of this year. He admits there's an increase in the undercount of the black community. He admits there's a tripling in the undercount in the Latino community. The U.S. government's admitted there's a racial undercount. My question is, what do we do about it? And in a city that's 84% black and brown, we are being hammered financially worse than any other city in the country. And I just want to speed up the appeal process so we can get it fixed.
And Detroit even seems to stand apart from other urban cities. It seems like what you're saying is, we were kind of singled out when it comes to our.
I think I think there are a lot of cities that were undercounted. I don't know of another city where the actual on-the-ground follow-up was more screwed up than it was here. The idea that you can plan 10 years for a census and the week that you're to go out on the follow-up, you don't even have a director in your office. I've never heard of such a thing, and that certainly contributed to the chaos that the workers experienced.
And you think that was malicious or
I don't know. I don't know whether it was malicious or not, but I know it wasn't. I know it was census malpractice, not to have a director. So I don't know why the director quit. Whether the director saw the disaster coming, I have no idea. All I know is they went 2 months without a director at the very time you were gearing up the door-to-door street follow-up. And I think you've got some workers here you can talk to who work the census. They'll be glad to tell you the stories. But they just couldn't get the addresses. When I worked for the Census Bureau in 1980, they gave me an entire week's worth of addresses at the start of the week. I didn't waste a single minute that way. These workers couldn't get addresses till the end of the day. Some days they didn't get any at all. There's just no excuse for it.
What's the likelihood you think either Mayor Duggan or Senator Peters that there'll be some transparency that, I know early on in the process that Luca has shared with the local updating file, the government and get these address files. What's the likelihood that the city will see these addresses that you've been discussing here today, and compare the data in an open way?
Well, certainly we're gonna push this issue aggressively. It's clear there is an awful lot of data to show that there was an undercount here in the city of Detroit. We've got to make it right. This impacts the residents of the city of Detroit in a significant way. When you think about each individual who is counted represents roughly $1,800 in federal resources each year. Over 10 years, that's $18,000. And the money goes into infrastructure, into healthcare, into education programs. That we've got to make sure we get this right. I've talked to the director of the census. I think he is open to having an appeal process broader. We've made an important first step in dealing with group organizations that may not have been counted. That will lead to additional people being counted in the city of Detroit. That's a first step, but any solution requires usually several steps, and I'm committed to doing that. Today, what we heard at the hearing, both with the mayor's testimony and community groups and the academic study done by the University of Michigan, I think builds a very compelling case and one that will have a significant impact here for the residents of the city of Detroit. And we have to get it right. So I'm optimistic, but we still have a lot of work to do.
You kind of laid that out, the steps that you need to take, Senator. Is there a timetable you can put on this when the day comes where they know they get the numbers right in Detroit?
Well, I think it's always difficult to put a timeline as to when it will actually happen, but hopefully it'll be soon. Every day that goes by is an injustice, and we want to make sure we get this right as quickly as possible.
What's the preferred outcome of an appeal? What do you think that will create or produce?
Well, the preferred outcome is that we just have an accurate count. That we're not asking for any special treatment. We're just saying that the census is focused on making sure that everybody is counted. That is the goal of the census. But clearly, in hard to count areas, that is a greater challenge. It was an even bigger challenge because of the COVID pandemic. At the same time, we realize that. But we also know that some of the efforts that should have been made to actually get out and knock on those doors and talk to individuals were not done the way they should have been. Certainly the mayor's testimony today was compelling. The research done by the University of Michigan is also compelling. This provides us a case to make sure that we have an accurate account. And every community should have an accurate account, and where you see that doesn't occur, we have to fix it and we have to do it quickly.
So it seems like the problem in Detroit with the appeal is, determining what houses were occupied and which, weren't occupied. Do you think there need to be process changes made with the appeal mechanism to help? I mean, is there a new kind of appeal that needs to be created? How do you kind of solve that issue?
It will be, we will have to expand the current appeal process as it exists right now to be able to take a look at that. And I think it's important for us to fix, not just for the city of Detroit and other communities in Michigan that may have been impacted. We don't want this to happen with the future census. The census is so important for communities, and it's so important for us as a country to know who lives in our country and where they come from, what they're engaged in. It's important to have that information. This is something that our founders wanted to make sure there was a census done on a regular basis because it's particularly important to govern a very diverse nation like we have here in the United States. So we want to get it done right for the last census, and we want to make sure we don't have this problem again in the next census.
And you're confident there's changes that could be made that would affect the current appeal. So this is an issue that we can fix, for the 2020 census and not just, next time this comes around and, subsequent years.
No, I think what we need to do to fix is pretty common sense, and it certainly was laid out, I think, very clearly in the hearing today. Fairly common sense solutions using other types of data to confirm whether or not the numbers are accurate, and then have a process in place to make those corrections going further. Now, we know that may not have an impact on congressional representation or things of that nature, but when it comes to federal resources and the ability to provide resources to people who need those resources, I think it is something that needs to be done quickly.
So just to clarify what you're saying, when you read the Census Bureau documentation on the count question resolution program, which is what's available now, which is what you spoke on, Mayor Duggan, Professor Moore spoke at the hearing, those documentations say that you will not be able to change the redistricting data, the apportionment data, if you're successful, but it will impact your population estimates. The discussion you're having here is accurate count. Both Mayor Duggan and Senator Peters is changing the count going forward, I assume, and not going back and fixing a 2020 count per se.
Yeah, it's we're not going to change representation numbers. That's why it's important, though, for us to make sure we get it right in 2030, because representation numbers are really important. But in this case, what this is about making sure resources are available to the citizens who live in the city, and people who live in the city of Detroit are entitled and deserve the same support of citizens who live in other cities across the country. And that's determined based on a population count, and the count has to be accurate, and that's going to be our goal, is to make sure it was indeed accurate.
We have a couple of our census enumerators here. We'd be
Oh,
glad to share their
Sure.
experience.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you mind if we start with your first and last name?
Clovis
Come up.
Foster.
You guys come around. Clovis Foster. Can you spell Clovis?
Clois.
And Foster, common spelling?
Yes, Fost.
And ma'am,
Brenda Jett,
spell your last name for me?
Jett.
Got it. Does anybody have anything you
Well,
want to jump
you
in?
guys both live here in Detroit. You conducted the census on behalf of the city. Could you just give us some kind of background of like what your role in this whole process was?
Well, I was a enumerator. I did Detroit, but the problems, I had a lot of problems. It was time I didn't get my information too late. I had to guess a lot, so that was not an accurate count. I also was asked to go out of town. My supervisor quit. She almost quit. It was just a lot of challenges that we had to go that really didn't get the count that we should have.
So in terms of information from the Census Bureau to you, like here's your assignments of where you're going to go, like that kind of information? Or?
Yes, I will get them late too, because we usually supposed to get our information at the beginning of the day, but sometimes I didn't get mine till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, and that's too late. The next time, it's real late, so I had to hurry. We get 100 a day, so we had to finish that 100. If we don't finish that 100, then it comes back, and then we have to do that the next day. So it just really was tiresome and confusing, and especially if you don't have the tools to get this done, it's real hard.
Is this the first census for both of you that you worked on? The
Yes.
single census?
Yes,
Yes.
it was.
What was it like in the community when you knocked on doors? I assume you were in the field too as well, collecting
Yes.
information? What was it like when you talked to your neighbors in the street?
I had some that didn't want to answer because of the trust. They didn't know where their information was going. I had some that filled it out. I needed an interpreter sometimes because some of the kids would have to interpret it when I go to an Arab community or someone stays in that community. So it was kind of hard, but the most of the time it was just real complicating, But they, especially the people of color, it is very hard to get them to fill out anything because they scared that the government is just going to take their information and just use it against them.
I'll ask both of you this question. What did you find was the most difficult part of it? I mean, you've laid out a few of the problems. What did you think was the most difficult part of being a census taker this time around?
I think that when we had days when we were just waiting to work and there was no work available, and yet we knew that there were areas that we hadn't covered, and time was ticking. You're watching the days go by, and we're getting toward the end, and they're saying, well, the computers are down. And it wasn't our immediate supervisors that were the problem, but if they couldn't get any information for us, then we couldn't do a thing. And that made it very difficult and frustrating to know that there was work to be done and we were prepared to do it, but we couldn't do it.
And it was clear to you from the beginning that this wasn't going to be an accurate count
Right.
by some of the things that you've laid out, but
Yes, because I did a lot of guessing.
meaning just guessing that someone lives there
There,
or that
yes.
sort of thing.
And then the neighbors didn't want to tell about their neighbors. They didn't want to give any information because we had to do them proxies. And the proxies, they going to a neighbor, they didn't want to answer those questions. They were scared that the neighbor going to say something to them. So it was a lot of times I had to guess how many people were there, who was there, what nationality, all that. And that's not good.
If someone doesn't want to fill out the paperwork, are you still supposed to count them as being part of the census, or do they have to fill it out to be counted?
We use the enumerators. We answer the question and we say that we did the question.
Right, we put down any information that is available. For instance, if we go and a child, for instance, comes to the door, she was saying there were instances where the mother didn't speak English, but the child, who was maybe 6 or 7 or 8, would tell you something, and then they're saying, come back when my husband is home, or whatever. Well, you'd be able to know, okay, at least we know they've got a child, there's a mother, there's a father, so you have a number but you wouldn't have all the names, you wouldn't have all the information because the child could only give you so much information.